Victorian England's wealthiest families built palaces they believed would stand forever. Thus, in 1870, the Grosvenors, Britain's richest aristocrats, commissioned the most ambitious private residence of their age. Indeed, Waterhouse Hall would require 12 years, hundreds of craftsmen, and over £800,000 to complete, a sum that would easily exceed 100 million today. Its Gothic towers soared above Cheshire's ancient oaks, and its 150 rooms showcased every refinement Victorian craftsmanship could achieve. Foreign princes and future kings walked its marble halls, and even 2 world wars saw it shelter wounded soldiers beneath its vaulted ceilings. Certainly, it was more than a house. It was a monument to an age when British power seemed eternal. Yet in 1961, the Grosvenor family made an announcement that shocked the nation. They would demolish their own masterpiece. In a matter of weeks, one of Britain's greatest architectural achievements would vanish forever. But why would one of England's most powerful families destroy their own legacy? In today's episode, we'll answer just that and more as we describe why the Grosvenor family demolished their own country house. The Grosvenor family's legacy in British aristocracy began in the 11th century when they were a part of the Norman conquest of 1066, with the Grosvenors having maintained their presence in Cheshire since then, though it was their acquisition of Eaton that would set the stage for their rise to prominence. You see, the Grosvenors' connection to Eaton began in the 15th century through marriage, establishing a presence that would span generations. This was because their influence expanded dramatically in 1677, when Sir Thomas Grosvenor married Mary Davies, whose inheritance included the manor of Ebury, the land that would develop into London's Mayfair and Belgravia districts. The strategic development of these holdings over generations established the Grosvenors as one of Britain's wealthiest landholding families. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the Grosvenors maintained their seat at Eaton, while expanding their influence in both local and national affairs. Their status was reflected in various honours: baronets since 1622, barons from 1761, earls from 1784, marquesses from 1831, and finally dukes when the Westminster dukedom was created in 1874. This progression through the ranks of the peerage mirrored their increasing wealth and influence. And the significance of Eaton as the family seat extended beyond its role as a country estate. It served as the physical embodiment of the Grosvenors' position in British society, a statement of their wealth and taste, and a centre for political and social networking. The estate's proximity to Chester, combined with the family's extensive London holdings, allowed them to maintain influence in both rural and urban spheres, a dual power base that few other aristocratic families could match. Furthermore, Eaton Hall underwent several transformations before its Victorian reimagining. William Samwell executed a significant rebuilding from 1675 to 1682, establishing the hall's prominence. From 1803 to 1814, William Porden reimagined the house in Gothic revival style, marking the first major architectural shift toward the Gothic aesthetic that would later define the estate. By 1870, the Grosvenor family's influence extended far beyond their ancestral Cheshire estates. It would be time to build a grand home in line with their contemporary status. By 1870, with the Grosvenor family's wealth and influence at its height, Hugh Lupus Grosvenor, then the third Marquess of Westminster, sought an architect capable of transforming their ancestral seat into a statement of Victorian grandeur. Their choice fell on Alfred Waterhouse, who had risen to national prominence after winning the competition to design the Manchester Assize Court in 1859. Through subsequent commissions, including Manchester Town Hall and the Natural History Museum in London, Waterhouse had established himself as a master of Gothic revival architecture, known for combining medieval inspiration with modern functionality. During the construction period, the family's status was further elevated when Hugh Lupus Grosvenor became the first Duke of Westminster in 1874. This new dukedom recognized their position among Britain's elite a status built upon the successful development of London's Mayfair and Belgravia districts. Waterhouse's commission encompassed exacting requirements that reflected both family needs and Victorian sensibilities, spaces for entertaining, housing art collections, and accommodating the extensive household operations necessary for a great estate. The construction, beginning in 1870, represented one of Victorian England's most substantial private building projects. The building programme proceeded methodically, with skilled craftsmen executing the Gothic detailing that characterised the structure. Waterhouse's design included a freestanding chapel and bell tower, demonstrating his mastery of Gothic revival elements developed through his previous ecclesiastical and civic projects. As work progressed, the emerging building began to dominate the Cheshire landscape, its Gothic revival features creating an imposing presence that reflected the family's status. The project's ambition was reflected in its final cost of £803,000, an astronomical sum for the period that demonstrated the Grosvenor family's immense resources. The project's scale was remarkable, even by Victorian standards, requiring an extensive team of craftsmen and specialists working continuously over the 12-year construction period. The interior work showcased the finest Victorian craftsmanship throughout the state rooms, family apartments and service areas, while the exterior commanded attention with its dramatic architectural presence. By 1882, the completed structure stood as one of the largest private residences in Victorian Britain, containing numerous bedrooms, staterooms and family apartments. The staterooms were designed to accommodate the extensive social obligations of a family at the pinnacle of society, while the chapel and bell tower particularly showcased the high level of craftsmanship employed throughout the project. The service areas were carefully planned to support the efficient operation of a great Victorian household, with domestic staff quarters and working spaces arranged to maintain the smooth running of the estate. The new Eaton Hall emerged as one of Victorian England's most ambitious architectural achievements, its scale reflecting both the technical capabilities of the age and the resources of one of Britain's wealthiest families. Waterhouse had created a masterwork that perfectly expressed the confidence and ambition of the Victorian era. Yet neither architect nor patron could foresee how dramatically the role of such houses would change in the century to come. The completion of Waterhouse's Eaton Hall in 1882 marked the beginning of a new era for the estate. The massive project, commissioned during the tenure of the second Marquess of Westminster, demonstrated both the family's immense wealth and their commitment to architectural excellence. Its creation coincided with a period of significant change for the Grosvenor family, as Hugh Lupus Grosvenor was elevated to become the first Duke of Westminster in 1874, during the construction period. The transition between generations brought changes to the estate's development. When Hugh Bendor Grosvenor succeeded as second Duke of Westminster in 1899, he continued the family tradition of estate improvement. His tenure saw the commissioning of architect Detmar Blow to undertake work on the gardens, demonstrating the ongoing evolution of the estate even after the completion of Waterhouse's masterwork. The Grosvenor family's position rested on their extensive property holdings in both London and Cheshire. The careful management of their London estates, particularly in Mayfair and Belgravia, provided the financial foundation that supported their country seat. This combination of urban and rural holdings distinguished them among Britain's aristocratic families. The scale of Waterhouse's creation reflected the social expectations placed upon one of Britain's wealthiest families. With over 150 rooms, the house was equipped to function both as a private residence and as a setting for the social and political gatherings expected of a family of their standing. By the early 20th century, Eaton Hall stood as one of Britain's greatest country houses, its Gothic revival architecture an icon of Victorian ambition and wealth. However, the social and economic landscape of Britain was changing, and the elaborate lifestyle that Waterhouse's design had been created to support would face unprecedented challenges in the decades to come, as world events and social change reshaped the role of Britain's great country houses. During the early 20th century, Britain's great country houses faced unprecedented challenges. By the 1930s, houses that had stood for generations were being demolished at an alarming rate. The forces behind this transformation were numerous. Death duties had increased dramatically, while income from agricultural estates declined. The availability of domestic staff, once plentiful and affordable, had dwindled as alternative employment offered better wages and greater freedom. Many aristocratic families found themselves asset-rich but cash-poor, their vast houses becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. When war erupted in 1914, Eaton Hall, like many of Britain's great houses, was transformed from private residence to institutional use. Initially serving as an all-ranks military hospital, by 1916 it had become a Red Cross facility caring for wounded servicemen until 1918. This conversion from domestic grandeur to utilitarian purpose marked the beginning of a profound change in the building's character and condition. The interwar years brought little relief to Britain's country house owners. By 1940, death duties had increased to 65%, and between 1946 and 1949 they were raised twice more. Across Britain, ancestral seats were being abandoned, sold or demolished. By 1955, country houses were being lost at the rate of one every 5 days. Some owners, attempting to avoid these punitive taxes, gave their properties to their heirs, but wartime casualties often complicated these arrangements. World War II saw Eaton Hall once again pressed into service of the nation, functioning as a hospital until 1943. The Britannia Royal Naval College then occupied the hall from 1943 to 1946, followed by its use as an officer cadet training school until 1960. This extended period of institutional use, while patriotic, took a severe toll on both the building's fabric and its elaborate Victorian interiors. Throughout this period, approximately 1,200 country houses were demolished in England alone. The destruction was not confined to minor properties. Even buildings of exceptional architectural merit fell victim to the changing times. For Eaton Hall, years of institutional use had left their mark. After serving as an officer cadet training school until 1960, the building stood empty, its future uncertain. By 1960, the practical challenges of maintaining Waterhouse's creation had become overwhelming, and, combined with rising maintenance costs and increased income taxation, the upkeep of such vast properties had become increasingly untenable. The institutional use over decades had taken a severe toll on both the building's structure and its interiors. Structural surveys revealed extensive dry rot throughout the building. The cost estimates for essential repairs proved prohibitive, particularly given the building's impracticality for modern family life. In 1961, with the 5th Duke of Westminster still a minor, his trustees took the drastic step of demolishing most of Waterhouse's grand Gothic creation. Workmen arrived at Eaton Hall with pneumatic drills and wrecking balls, methodically reducing Waterhouse's turrets, cloisters, and finely carved stonework to rubble. Salvageable materials found their way to architectural yards, while ornamental fragments were scattered or sold off quietly. Dust lingered in the air as the grand interiors, once graced by royalty and statesmen, gave way to broken plaster and exposed timber. It wasn't until 1968, well after Eaton's disappearance, that legislation demanded explicit permissions for destroying historically significant structures. Not all traces vanished, though. The chapel and clock tower were spared, providing a tenuous link to Eaton's Victorian splendour. In their shadow, architect John Dennis designed a modern residence clad in white travertine. This new structure offered comfort and practicality for a changing world, but it lacked the poetic grandeur of its predecessor. By the late 1980s, as Britain's attitude toward heritage evolved, the Grosvenors reassessed their country seat. Recognizing the growing appreciation for historical continuity and classical aesthetics, the 6th Duke of Westminster commissioned architect John Simpson. Between 1989 and 1991, Simpson encased Denny's modern house in a neo-French classical style, blending new materials with old-world refinement and restoring a sense of architectural gravitas to the estate. During the 1990s, Eaton Hall's character shifted once more. While still a private residence, the estate opened its gardens for charity events, public visits, and community gatherings, ensuring that Eaton remained woven into the social fabric. Though Waterhouse's masterpiece had vanished decades earlier, Eaton Hall endured, reshaped, adapted, and still central to the enduring legacy of the Grosvenor family. And now, we'd like to see you in the comments. What is your opinion on the family getting rid of the old building? Do you prefer the more modern Eaton Hall, or should they have found a way to preserve everything? We can't wait to hear your thoughts. And with that said, thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Mansions. And cheers until next time.